So the Biden administration and Kevin McCarthy, the GOP House, had a deadline, October 1st. If we don't come to an agreement on October 1st, the government shuts down. Well, it doesn't really shut down. First of all, it doesn't really shut down. It simply has to operate on the $5.5 trillion it's taking in taxes instead of the $7.5 trillion that it's spending every year. It needs to cut $2 trillion in spending in order to survive. And that means, guess what? Medicare, Social Security, all the basics get funded first because they're self-funded. You pay a direct tax to Medicare. You pay a direct tax to Social Security. They're required to maintain. And then afterwards, you typically pay the troops to keep your national defense because it's a constitutional mandate that the executive branch maintain our borders and our security. And then afterwards, you start making, cuts where you can. All you have to do really is cut government by 20% and you balance your budget. It's not that big a deal. But they're making it a big deal. Government will shut down. Air traffic controllers. Planes will fall out of the sky. Trains will run amok. Prisons will empty. None of that happens. None of it. So they sign a budget deal. They come to an agreement. They fight and war and discuss things when all you really need to do is have a show of hands. It takes 10 minutes. It's a matter of everybody's got to get something to get what they want done. So they sign a budget agreement. Everybody goes, yay! Government continues to operate. The money keeps flowing. Except it's only going to last for 6 weeks. The budget deal was only enough money to last 6 weeks. To give you an idea of how ridiculous the spending is, this budget deal only lasts 6 weeks, keeps the government. So what happens? So we're now at a deadline, again, right before Thanksgiving, in 6 weeks. Because what is it? November 24th, right? Is Thanksgiving, or the fourth Thursday, fourth Thursday? That's gonna fall right again. They're gonna have to make a deal right before Thanksgiving, and we're gonna be in this same boat once again. Meanwhile, money still is flowing to Ukraine. Money is still flowing to ridiculous education research projects, and the American people, their infrastructure is falling apart. We'll talk about that next. Remember how the Biden administration talked, well, infrastructure. Well, we'll get to it in a minute. It's just a big game. Because they refuse to come to address with the terms. You're spending $7.5 trillion and you're making only $5.5 trillion. How are you going to resolve it? You can raise all the taxes you want. You're never going to raise that kind of a budget gap. $2.5 trillion. We only take in $5 trillion. And you're asking 50% more taxes from the American people in order to balance the budget when they're being taxed at a higher rate than they have ever been. The overall rake from the economy is greater as a percentage of the economy and as a total amount than it's ever been. Americans are being soaked in taxes, and you don't realize it. Property taxes, sales taxes, federal income tax, federal excise taxes, federal fees on your utilities, your bills. It's all in there. You just read your bill. Most people don't read the bill because it's all done electronically. Your money comes out of your account, and you don't even get a statement in the mail anymore. You got to look it up online. Nobody does that, or very few people do. You're being soaked. This is why people no longer have disposable income. That and the fact that the inflationary decisions by this government have liquidated the value of your dollar. One of the things I posted to Facebook was something called the Big Mac Index. Big Mac, everybody knows what Big Mac is. McDonald's, 2 all-beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, and pickles and onions on a sesame seed bun, if you remember the commercial. There's an index. How much does a Big Mac cost in Switzerland? How much does it cost in England? How much does it cost here? They have different versions of it. They call it different things, but it's a Big Mac. And then what it's been over the last 70 years, or whatever, however long the Big Mac has been around. What is it, 1960 something? So what's that, 60 years? It's called the Big Mac Index, and it's a really good indication of what real inflation looks like. They do these inflation numbers, but the inflation index, how they're counting inflation, changes depending on administration. Do they include energy? Do they include housing? Right now, our current inflation index does not include housing, energy, and food. Well, what else is there? So it's not a real inflation rate. You know, they talk about, oh, the inflation rate's only 2%, only 3%, only 4%, when it should only be 1%, really. But it doesn't include basic things. The Big Mac index does. It's a very simple thing. And the Big Mac index includes other things besides just the price of the Big Mac. But I posted it for a reason. The Big Mac index shows that inflation is near 20% and has been so for a number of years. This is not just a Biden thing. This is one of the factors that leads to a massive problem with government debt, because inflation affects your interest rates, and interest rates affects how much interest you're paying on the debt. If you're $34 trillion in debt and the interest rate is almost none, then the interest payments on the 34 trillion, the amount of debt that you have, are not significant. It's only maybe $100 billion, and you can easily pay it. It's no big deal, right? That $34 trillion in debt is no big deal if it's only a $100 billion payment, if it's only a small percentage of your budget. But when your debt gets to the point, because of interest rates and inflation, when your debt gets so high that it's now costing $500 billion, which is almost what Medicare costs us, then you start to realize the effects of the policies of overspending. Because overspending, government overspending, is the main contributor to inflation. So this budget deal, by saying, well, here's some more money, now you can go operate the government so that you can spend all this money with Ukraine and hand out all these money to the states, and COVID money and subsidies and EV money and education loans, is just making the problem worse, because inflation will continue to rise and the government will not be held in check. And this is why Kevin McCarthy is coming under such heat. He may even lose his job, maybe. Matt Gaetz is making a push for new Speaker of the House. The House of Representatives is the controlling factor in spending. It was designed that way by the framers of the Constitution. If you read the articles of the Constitution, it says you're responsible for your debts, and the House has the responsibility of controlling that spending. The executive branch is supposed to present a budget and said, this is what we want to spend money on, and the House is going to say yes and no and what, and hand it back to the president. That's how we used to operate this country. We don't do that anymore. The federal government, the executive branch, has not provided a budget that they have stuck to, and I don't know how many years, at least since Obama. And the House is not holding them accountable for it. Well, you overspent your budget. It's your problem. The government's got to shut down. That's not an extreme position, and it's what Kevin McCarthy should have said to Joe Biden. Or at least the negotiation should be, okay, we'll agree to giving you more money for spending, but you have to curtail your spending. You have to reduce it. You have to reduce the debt. You need to come up with a plan. And as a matter of fact, the last budget deal that came around, Kevin McCarthy presented a plan that was by the Republicans in the House, which is their responsibility. Here is a solution that we can live with. This is a control on your spending. This is a way we can finance the debt. They didn't do that. They just did a clean bill because we don't want government. We always lose. No, you don't lose. You personally, the congressman, lose, but the American people lose. That's what he's saying to you. We always lose when the government shuts down. The mainstream media crucifies us. Yeah, you, Congress. Not us, the American people. They're not criticizing the American people. So your responsibility as a leader of this government is to protect the American people from overspending. That's your responsibility. That's your duty. That's what we hired you for. As a conservative, as a Republican, you're not doing that. You're saying, I don't want to lose my job as Speaker of the House. I don't want to lose my position. I don't want to get voted out of office. So I'm going to make this deal so that money keeps flowing to you. Is that any proper way to run a government? That's a game. That's a ridiculous lie. Government can't shut down. Yes, it can. Certainly can. We could certainly survive with the federal government living on $5 trillion. We did it just a few years ago, for God's sakes. This is ridiculous. It's nonsense. And again, mass media is not going to tell you that. Fox News is not going to tell you that. CNN certainly isn't. MSNBC says it's all on the Republicans on the House. They're a bunch of extremists. How extreme? Can you imagine if you have a household, you're earning, let's say, $50,000 a year, and your spending habits are spending at $800,000 a year, and you're told, well, you can't spend any more on your credit cards, you can't buy any new clothes, you can't buy any new things at the mall, you can't do anything, you've got to pay off your debt. Oh, that's extreme. We're just going to get another credit card and keep on spending. That's an extreme position. Well, it's the same argument. It's the same Stupid argument. This is all a game. It's a lie. They've driven up inflation, they've made the dollar worthless, and then they wonder why they don't have any money to spend in government. They literally paint themselves into an economic corner, and you, the American people, when they sign a budget deal, you think you're getting a deal when they sign a budget deal and say government isn't closing. No, you're getting hosed. Because they're going to continue to spend now because of this budget deal. Just as they did the last budget deal. And it's only for 6 weeks. So I'll have to go through this again. They just keep kicking the can down the road. Well, we don't have to worry about it right now. You should be worrying about it right now. This is a national security threat. We don't have the money to defend our country properly. We don't have the money to rebuild our nation of things that are getting old and getting broken. Let's talk about that next. Because they're all using these budget deal games as political weapons against the other party, and nobody cares about what the American people. Nobody cares about reality or facts. New York City is experiencing flooding like it hasn't in the past. I mean, I grew up in New York, but let's talk about it specifically. We'll be right back after this brief but important message.